Karl Rinich was born in 1876 in Stavky in Ukraine. In 1903, he was married in Tiraspol in what's now Moldova. It's kind of interesting because I just got back from Tiraspol a couple of weeks ago, and he moved here to North Dakota with his wife and died in 1933. We're right outside of the town of Mercer, not far away from Wilton, North Dakota, where we saw the Ukrainian Church, the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Now, what's so fascinating about Karl Rinich is the fact that he contributed some of these beautiful wrought iron German from Russian crosses, a sort of cultural symbol that was very popular among the Germans that had settled after Catherine the Great's invitation in South Russia, in places like Moldova and Ukraine. And after dying in 1933, these crosses are still recognized as important cultural symbols. Karl lived and worked a lot around Wilton in North Dakota. This was a stop along the Sioux Line, a line going from Chicago to North Dakota, which was a multi-ethnic community. So this is about midway between Mercer, where he's buried, and Wilton, which had a Catholic church, still has a Catholic church, an Orthodox church, and a sort of non-denominational church. And these cast iron crosses are mostly the Just family. And you can see here very sadly that the Just family probably had a few members who passed away during the diseases that would sweep across the prairie. David Just, Edward Just, both in 1910, 1911. You had Emil Just and Christoph Just, 1913, 1918, and Emma Just, who died in 1909. And in the same Lutheran cemetery, the Free family, the Bofserts and Benders, there's quite a few Laibs, L-A-I-Bs. And you can tell these immigrants held on to their culture. This grave is still written in German. Imagine what the culture shift was like for these early pioneers. I hope you can read the text on this grave, but it is likewise in German. Philip Wall, 1856 to April 1913. And it's so fascinating to think about the families of these pioneers who came here over a century ago and found friendship in Ukrainians. You can see a lasso here. You can see, actually there's a real lasso on the welded together iron cross behind this Curly family to really carve out a place for yourself on the high prairie. And the Zion Lutheran Church here burned down, I believe, in 1976. There's a little monument for it behind there, 1906 to 76. This is a nice hill just a couple yards to the west of the cemetery for Mercer, where Karl Rinich is buried. And if you look through town, you can see a couple of old Lutheran churches. A lot of Ukrainians lived around this area near Wilton, but also Germans from Russia and a lot of other ethnic groups too, pioneers and settlers in North Dakota. And in the back left corner of the hillside cemetery is the grave of Karl Rinich with his own wrought iron cross of his own design, used for the Just family outside of town. And his name is spelled Karl with a K there, but on this tombstone they use a C. I've seen a couple of graves that look like this as well. Very nice homemade tombstones. And you can see here powder blue sort of dye. It's made with fossilized wood, agate, and I can't make out what was under here.
but it shows a lot of care.
And here's another handmade flint and fossil headstone. I think there's 3 of them in this cemetery. And in the same cemetery outside of town, you've got this. I saw the same thing at the Ukrainian church, but they weren't as close together. These seem to be people who died in the disease epidemics that swept across the prairie. Behind me is the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church in Wilton, North Dakota. And the story here is pretty interesting because in 1897, a group of Ukrainians moved from Galicia first to Canada and then down here to this stop on the Sioux line, which led from North Dakota back to Chicago. Now, for a number of years, they held private service in their own homes, but in 1913, they pooled their money to help create this church here behind me, a church that is still in use. Now, I've been walking around town and I just actually had dinner at a local place, a sports bar, that serves Volga German food. And I was laughing with my friend that not even Volga has Volga German food anymore. A lot of these people at the time, Galicia, I believe, was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So a lot of them were sort of had an affinity towards the Germans. There are 3 cemeteries outside of Wilton, North Dakota that show the mixed nature of immigrants in this community, but how close they were. This one is the Holy Trinity Orthodox, and there's less people buried here because they're mostly ethnic Ukrainian. And down here, you've got a Catholic and Protestant cemetery, and there you'll see more Volga Germans and the Germans from Russia iron crosses in the back of those cemeteries. And you can see on the sign for the Orthodox cemetery, the church in the town of Wilton. We've come here to see the grave of John Krivatsky and talk a little bit about him. Krivatsky died in 1959, 83 years old. He was born in 1876, and with his friend, John Shochuk, helped to actually make the church that's shown on the Orthodox cemetery sign, the one that hasn't held service, at least since it was listed as a historic site in 1981. Right behind John Krivatsky's grave is Mary Palanik, who married John Basarba, a man who had an interesting surname, one that reflects the complex nature of nationality in Eastern Europe before our modern borders. This name is thought to be of Turkic origin, meaning conqueror or ruler father. It has to do with the Bessarab dynasty, a dynasty ruling in what's now Romania, and that dynasty gave its name to Bessarabia. The name can also be an ethnic name for someone from Bessarabia, or in a broader sense, for a Wallachian. So many of these immigrants were ethnically German who moved to Eastern Europe and Ukraine as missionaries when it was a part of the Russian Empire. The central cemetery here outside of town is St. Peter and Paul, and we can see in the back of the cemetery some interesting crosses of the Germans from Russia, or the Volga Germans. But you can see here names like Patrick is a fairly common surname, but you've also got Duma, another Patrick, quite a few Patricks. Triska is a very common name as well. It shows that these families stayed together for a very long time. Many of them, however, have since moved out, a lot of them to Bismarck or Minot or across the country. The Hruby surname is also very common here. There's a line of Hrubys in the back. And outside of Walton, we've got this interesting gravestone. I believe this is the only tombstone in the cemetery I've seen that still uses Cyrillic lettering. Most of these have sort of anglicized. And this is, again, the Hruby surname. And this is what I mean when I talk about the Germans from Russia, the Volga Germans. They were known for their wrought iron crosses, which you can see in the back. They would have made these while alive, or their family would have made them, and it was kind of a form of art that they were very proud of. At one point, many cemeteries in Russia and South Russia looked like this, but usually after the Second World War they were scrapped for metal. And the last cemetery of the three, the Sacred Heart Cemetery, I'm willing to bet is a non-denominational one. You can see the other two along this way. There's two crosses. One here, and then one further over here. Another town that should be famous for its Ukrainian history is Wilton, North Dakota. Right here, you can see the old grain elevator in the background. Wilton was platted in 1899. It was on the Sioux Line, which would actually come through the town 1 year later in 1900. Now, it was named Wilton because of an early settler born in Wilton, Maine, but most of the inhabitants here came from Ukraine as early settlers. And this is Wilton's historic train station, built in 1900, the same year that the Sioux Line from Chicago came through, bringing with it many, many immigrants from Ukraine, who brought with them a Ukrainian church. And the Wilton Depot on the Sioux Line has changed a lot since this photo was taken in 1911. And if you turn around, you can see the modern grain elevator is quite a bit larger than it was back in the early 1900s. And here is the modern Brock grain silos. You know, I was here a couple of years ago, passing through with my ex, and I stopped at this little restaurant right here on the left, now kind of a sports bar. So I think I might stop back in there because they had some good Norwegian food. I wonder if they have decent Ukrainian or Russian food. But here is downtown Wilton.